Nobody taught me how to do an ad for banks. Have you guys done any ads for banks? Yeah? How hard is it? Right? It's pretty hard. And then try to do a retail ad. Try to do an ad about the 3.1% on that savings account. It's hard. It's really hard. So I told myself, well, you know what? Fate, gave me this card, and dealt me this card, and I'm going to work really hard at figuring it out. So I worked really hard. And when I was in there, I realized that that's how they actually hired me. So by the time I got finally settled with the creative director that I had to work for, this creative director didn't really like my style. Isn't that crazy? They didn't like my style. All right. I was the guy who loved to do you'll see in some of the work that I do. I used to draw, and I like to do things a little complex. It took me almost 10 years to understand that simple is the key to advertising. But my boss was also a gentleman who had grown up in Brooklyn and old school, and his perfect ad was the headline and the product shot and the tagline. It got to the point after 5 years at Y&R that I knew exactly which typeface he loved. Take any Futura and change it. Stretch it, do this, do that. Put it in any concept, any board that you were working on, and you were making the meeting. You will definitely make it could be like this piece of shit. And you put Futura on it, and you made the meeting, right? So I learned real fast after 5 years. I'm like, wow, yeah, I'm really not evolving as a creative. I'm not really working for somebody that's allowing me to do what I am good at. And I started working really hard on my book internally. Around that time is when my partner and I did a really nice campaign for Campbell's soup companies, and that campaign just did amazingly well, put us in the map, put the agency in the map, because it's really hard to do a good soup ad and something that Campbell's soup will actually buy. There's a thing called testing out there. Have you guys been told much about testing and ASI or any of this stuff? No?
I've read about it.
You've read about it, okay, well, it exists out there. And it's something that you shouldn't be learning here in ad school. It's not necessarily the best thing, but it's something you should definitely be very aware of, because you'll get to the agency, whether it's Saatchi, whether it's Y&R, whether it's, I've heard some friends working at Wyden that had to deal with some of these brands, and what basically they do is they take your little pretty ad that you have and they parade it around the entire country, right? And you have this nice hard edges, something that to hold on to, it's an idea. And by the time it's done, it's basically a circle, and it's really hard to get a hold of. And sometimes you're like, where you started, where you finish, it's not the same thing. And you're hoping that it stays at that level, but sometimes it goes down here. So we put together an entire portfolio of things, and I made it my objective, my dream, not to settle. I settled coming out of ad school. I really did. Got a wife out of the deal, was making good money, and everybody loved me in the agency, but I wasn't satisfied as a creative. And so it gets me to the point that you have to be very passionate about what you do, and I know it's a different setup nowadays, but if I have to scare you into anything, it's bust your ass right here. Work really hard in your book. Because once you're out of here, it's really, really, really hard to say to yourself after you parade your book across New York, Chicago, or LA, and say to yourself, man, this is not working. You're going to fire yourself. I don't know how much a school costs, but I know that I just, after 10 years, paid all my student loans from VCU and Miami Ad School, right? So if this doesn't work for you, you could have taken the money and just partied in North Clark in some bar for like 5 years, and you would have done just as good. But that's why we're not talking about that. We're talking about just making you passionate about what you do. So last year, Tony Granger took a look at our work and gave us an opportunity. I remember walking into his office to show him my work, and I like I said, I was saying before, I was very, very single-minded. I would only work for really good agencies and agencies that like my work, and if they didn't like my work, then to hell with them. I met with the Crispin and Porters, the Saatchi. When I walked in to talk to Tony, I realized to my surprise that one of the reasons I was having a hard time getting out of Y&R and jumping into a good agency was simply because I had spent too much time in a place that, according to Tony Granger, the place didn't do any good work. They didn't do any good work. So how could somebody passionate about the business could stay in the place for 10 years? And that was an interesting question. I mean, I was a little dumbfounded. I was like, wow, maybe that's why I couldn't get into CRISPR. Because the book, every time it landed in some agency, people were like, wow, look at this work. And they got to the resume and they were like, whoa, why not 10 years? So, and that's when I learned that Tony's philosophy, and this is something to definitely be thought about, is you need to get up in the morning. And when you get up in the morning, you want to get up and be the baddest creative you can possibly be in your business. Because it's not really about getting up in the morning and doing a pretty picture and put a headline and make somebody smile or cry or do something, but it's really about becoming a problem solver. I remember like there was a kid that you know, 3-4 years after I left, I had gone back to Miami Art School to do a little speaking for them, and then subsequently we went partying around South Beach, and I ran into this guy, right, that had seen me at the art school. He was older, you know, older, like not your usual young guy, but older. He walked straight up to me and he was just like, I am going to go to New York and I need you to help me to find it. His approach was so direct and very honest, and I was like, great, I'd love to see your work, blah, blah, blah. He came over and showed me his work, and he talked all about like how he was going to solve every problem that was out there. Meaning like a brief, like all that. My boss that I worked for at Y&R was the kind of guy that worked 9 to 5. And loved to have creatives that solved problems for him. If you solved a problem for him, he could go on the weekend, go to the Hamptons, have a cocktail with his wife, and never ever had to worry about something withstanding for the weekend. He didn't like working weekends, and if he had to work weekends, he got really upset. So this cat that came to my office and shared his work with me, I really liked him. You know, we talked for 2 hours. I hadn't even looked at his work. We were hanging out. I was like, man, I want this guy to work here just because I want to go have beers with him, right? And then the recruiter, Linda Bath, called up, right? And says, your friend here was like Friday, 6 o'clock. And I thought he was going to come in at 5. I've been waiting because I got to go. I was like, oh, hold on. Send him over. And then right after that, after she saw him, she called me and said, where did you find this cat? And I was like, well, Miami, whatever. It's like, he was amazing. I really wanted to meet Jim Ferguson, the ECD at the time. I said, great. So I called him up and I said, great news, they want you to come up and see the big guy. Come back on Monday. So he came back on Monday at about 1 o'clock, and he's sitting in my office about to go see Jim Ferguson. His phone rings, and he gets total white in the face, and I'm like, what? And it's like, it's Cliff Freeman. They want me to come and see them. And Cliff Freeman was this agency, I don't know, 5-6 years ago that was just like the hottest thing in New York.
Is this Rick Ardito?
Yeah. And Rick is sitting there and is telling me this, and I'm like, no, you gotta go see Jim. I just like touched you up, but I understand it's Cliff Freeman. You gotta go. I was like, okay. So he went to Cliff Freeman, and within 1 hour he had a job. I looked at his book. His book was simple. All white space, simple headlines. He was an art director. But you know what got him the job? And he was so smart. He pitched himself as a problem solver. He didn't walk in with this big ego. I just want the one show pencil for student work, or my mom really likes my ads, so I'm a badass. You know. He just said, I'm going to come and solve your problems. And I went, wow, Eureka! What a great concept, right? Problem solving. So, if I got to give you any other advice, is be humble, but be assertive, and solve problems, no matter what it is, because. You know, now I'm working, so Tony left. He started the Y&R, of all things.
I know the irony of that, huh?
Huh?
The irony of that.
The irony of that. Yeah, I spent 10 years trying to chase Tony Granger, and I just knocked on that door, until I finally got in. He hires me, and within 6 months of me being there, he jumped out of Saatchi and went to my old place at Y&R. All right? But, you know, my benefit out of the whole situation is that Jerry Graff has come over to work with us. And he's a badass. He's awesome. He does some really fun work for those of you that study the industry and see his work for Skittles, Snickers, you know, Guinness, all that. He's a real deal. And you know what he's teaching now? What he's telling us all is that for every problem out there, there is a solution. If you look at all his work across the board, you know, as a creative, sometimes when you work on television or you know, particularly in television, you don't want to go to that demo shop. Bite and smile, where you're like, you know, like this tastes really good, but every client out there asks for it, right? So Jerry says, okay, how do you give them that and then be able to get something creative on the other end, something